We have one scheduled item on the agenda, and we'll start with that item. Item number 1.
Item 1, communication from the mayor relative to the status of the mayor's Gang Reduction and Youth Development Office for the period January 1st, 2009 through June 30th, 2009.
Good afternoon. Reverend Jeff Carr, Deputy Mayor for Gang Reduction and Youth Development. It's good to be here this afternoon. Wanted to just give you a report of our last 6 months, the status of what we've been working on. And I think you should have already received a written report that we submitted to the clerk. But just want to touch base, highlight some of the things that we've been up to this last 6 months and what's in the report. The report really provides updates on the contract compliance for our new gang prevention intervention providers, gives you some information on what's going on with the Gang Reduction Youth Development Evaluation, also an information system that we're developing called GRIDIS. Also talks about the Youth Services Eligibility tool, which is the screening tool that we developed and also have been using for our prevention contractors to determine kids that are most at risk. And then some of the initiatives that we've been working on this year, from the gun buyback to Summer Night Lights and our WA partnership around employment training and getting ex-gang members and gang-affiliated youth into jobs. And then also the Gang Intervention Training Academy, which we've been working on, as well as the Safe Passages. So I'm sure you have a few questions, but I'll take just a couple minutes to kind of walk us through the report. The first part is just in the area of contract compliance regarding new gang prevention intervention. We have been taking numerous steps to ensure that services are tracked and contractors are held accountable. We developed, and I believe there's an attachment, a fiscal policy to assist contractors in better understanding what we're doing and the processes, so they have a better sense of that. We've also developed a second document, monitoring policy and procedures, to really formalize our office's accountability measures, such as contract compliance, site visit protocols, service performance, etc. And there's an attachment under there as well. In April of this year, we actually completed monitoring site visits to all 12 gang prevention contractors, and the goal of those was just to ensure that agencies were making progress towards their contractual goals. After the site visits were completed, our staff developed monitoring reports that reflected the operations of the contractor, the quality and quantity of services based on information gathered on site from direct observation, interviews, and document review. Some of the agencies did require corrective action, and our staff identified those issues of noncompliance and made specific recommendations with deadlines for the contractors to meet. Just last month, our staff conducted a second monitoring visit to all 12 of the gang prevention contractors in the grid zones to coincide with the end of their first-term contract. And then our staff also conducted monitoring visits to the 4 gang prevention contractors who are providing services outside of the grid zones. And then later this month, our office plans to conduct monitoring visits to the 7 gang intervention contractors who are assigned to the 12 grid zones. And similar site visits, similar to the site visits we did with prevention providers in June, Harder & Company, who is the on-the-ground partner with the Urban Institute on the evaluation, will be joining our staff to begin the data gathering process and information on each intervention agency. And then we'll also be visiting 3 additional intervention sites that are outside, providing intervention services outside the grid zones. In terms of the Gang Reduction Youth Development Evaluation, we actually mentioned, or as reported in our 6-month report, we had established a formal working group, which was comprised of researchers and evaluators from across the country who have a lot of knowledge in project implementation and years of experience working with both successful and failed efforts to reduce gang crime. That working group helped us provide input in the development of the evaluation RFP that was released in November of last year for an amount of $900,000 annually. The working group convened again in January of this past year, January 26th and 27th, to review and recommend a bidder to evaluate both the process and individual outcomes of the GRID program. Top 3 bidders were selected, then interviewed over the phone by the working group, and as a result of the review process, the Urban Institute was awarded the contract effective April 1st. Urban Institute will conduct a formative evaluation that considers outcomes at both the individual level and at the community or zone level. And in addition, Urban Institute plans to incorporate a cost-benefit analysis for both individual and community outcomes in order to fully inform local policy makers and practitioners of the fiscal implications of the GRID strategies and efforts. And then to ensure that Urban Institute's multi-year evaluation work plan is developed using a best practice approach, an independent working group has been formed and asked to serve in an advisory role to review plans and make recommendations to UI on a quarterly basis. The GRID information system, or GRIDIS, we identified a case management and data collection system designed by Athena software called Penelope that will really, we believe, enhance our ability to the ability of contractors to manage clients and actually to collect data for our office. The system is a fully integrated web-based system that's intended for use primarily by counseling and mental health providers, and it aims to increase efficiency and improve customer service by integrating human resources, case notes, and outcome evaluation into one system. We expect to roll the system out by late summer for prevention providers, and soon after that for the intervention contractors. And Athena will be providing training for all of the contractors. Presently, we have 3 prevention contractors that are serving as beta sites for the system: the Violence Intervention Program in Ramona Gardens, Community Build in Baldwin Village, and New Directions for Youth in Panorama City. And the idea of the beta sites was to actually help our office identify the necessary system modifications and recommendations that would improve the functionality from the user's perspective so that they can really use this well. The system actually has a number of features, including its HIPAA security provisions. There's multiple levels of security features, a web-based password-protected server, interactive help menus, and over 100 user configurable and industry standard reports. And we actually worked with the ITA department. Originally, our plan was to use ISIS, which had been piloted by the Community Development Department. There's been a number of audits on that and reports on that it wasn't the best system. And actually, after talking to ITA, they recommended we go with something else, both because of what we needed in terms of wanting to collect data, but also the time it would have taken to make the modifications. And they actually, we ran this plan by them as the new policy I think you're aware of, to try and have one central place where the city does IT now. So we went through their committee and got their approval for doing this. We will subsidize the case management system and data collection system, including all the trainings and materials for the first year, and then in the second and third year, in each one of the contractors' budget, there's 5% set aside for data collection, and so there's already money that's been earmarked for them to use that. The next area is the Youth Services Eligibility tool that we developed in partnership with gang researchers at the University of Southern California and UC Irvine, which is an assessment tool to assist community agencies in the selection of clients at highest risk of gang joining and most appropriate for street gang prevention programming. The tool is the first of its kind in the country, and we believe will help us reduce false positives, i.e. agencies enrolling youth into a program that have a low likelihood of ever joining a gang in the first place. And our new approach is really to try and identify high-risk youth is consistent with growing recognition among practitioners and researchers that overly broad inclusion of risks used to select youth for gang prevention programs can create inefficiencies and actually reduce the effectiveness of the effort. Since December of last year, our office, in partnership with USC, has held 5 separate trainings for gang prevention staff, including case managers, licensed social workers, and subcontractors, on how to administer the YSET. And once youth are actually interviewed in a private setting after getting written parental consent and youth assent, as part of the consent process, the clients are assured that their response will be kept confidential and not shared with anyone outside of the GRID program, like with their parents or teachers or law enforcement. The tool actually includes 2 separate interviews or screens. The first screen includes only the specific risk factors that are based on strong empirical proof in terms of the data over the last 20 years. And that screen 1 is actually the interview that's used to determine eligibility for the programs. And then screen 2, we really believe has potential to improve the prediction of gang joining, because it's more focused on things that haven't been proved yet in the research, but a lot more environmental factors and things like that we believe over time will be improved. And then both of these sets of risk factors are measured for the youth enrolled in the programs, and then the information is actually provided to the prevention program staff for them to actually use in their case plan. So it gives them where the elevated risk factors are in the life of the young person, then they can design a very specific case plan to address those risk factors. And then the information also is provided to the program evaluation team, so they can use that as a baseline for measures in which change can be monitored. In addition, we actually we have some agencies. We have 5 agencies that are actually currently piloting an audio computer-aided self-interview system that allows young people to actually wear headphones. It's in English and Spanish, and actually they can go through the assessment themselves. By August, we expect that all 16 sites will have the use of the ACOSI system, and that'll be sort of the primary mode for how they do client assessments, but yet they'll still have the option to do face-to-face interview for those who prefer it. As of last Friday, the 26th, we actually have enrolled, I guess it was a previous Friday, excuse me, we have enrolled a total of 718 young people in gang prevention services across the city. There are currently 16 agencies providing services, and our accumulated eligibility rate has reached 43%, which means that agencies actually are improving their outreach strategies to focus on youth with elevated risk. We actually had much lower when we first started. Somewhere in the range, it was averaging about 20 to 30% eligibility rate, and it's been a good sign that actually has continued to go up actually almost every week. And so we think that is partly through the training, also through the better job of doing targeted recruitment to make sure we get the right kids. And then we've had a number of initiatives this year. We had a gun buyback on Mother's Day weekend. Some of you may recall the idea was to see if we could copy something that had been done in the county with the sheriff's department a number of times in the last few years to try and get as many guns off the street as possible. I mean, it was really a simple process to use sort of secure, neutral locations in the community where people could feel comfortable in turning over their firearms with no questions asked in exchange for a Visa card or a Ralph's gift card. We had a total of 19 locations. Probably LAPD, we left that up to them. That was probably a few too many, as it turns out, but we got unbelievable response. We had 1,302 gift cards, which total over $130,000 that we raised from private sources. And we collected actually 1,696 firearms here in the city, but one of our partners was the sheriff's department, so we pushed a lot of folks particularly in the areas just outside the city in the unincorporated part of the county. So if you add the sheriff's department that day actually received over 800 guns, so combined we had over 2,500 guns. As I mentioned, people received a $100 gift card for a handgun and $200 for a assault weapon. And actually, we ran out of gift cards by about noon when we had received just under 1,300 guns. And so we still received, it was actually 1,200 guns. We still received almost 500 guns after there were no gift cards left, which was interesting that people still wanted to get rid of their guns, which was, I think, a good thing.
Now, you mentioned by noon you had run out of gift cards. What were the hours of operation?
10 to 3. Okay. Yeah, and actually people were lined up before 10 o'clock. I mean, it also speaks, I think, to where the economy's at. People were really, people are hurting.
I need to ask this question on the record because some people assume tough neighborhoods, I'm assuming that's where
No, actually, they were all over the city.
All over the city?
We had 19 locations. We had 7 in the valley, I believe. We had locations all over the city. It was citywide. We didn't target
Are there any tough neighborhoods in the valley?
Yeah.
Okay. But people would assume people turning in firearms, waiting in line a long time, running out of the gift cards, that there would be an incident. Were there any incidents recorded?
No. No, we didn't have any problems. And actually, somebody asked me, sort of what was the typical person, that actually turned in a gun. And I said, well, they were as varied as the citizens of the city. I mean, it was really pretty amazing.
What kind of gift cards?
$100 and $200 gift cards. They were mostly from Ralph's grocery store.
Okay, except for the guy that went, okay, I want Bed Bath & Beyond, or somebody's going to get hurt.
And then we had Visa gift cards.
But that didn't
as well.
happen, right?
That didn't happen.
Nobody got out of hand.
It was actually, LAPD did a fabulous job. It was sort of like a drive up. Basically, you would drive up. We instructed people to have the guns in their trunk, which of course, not everyone did, but that was the plan. And then so they would pull up. They didn't have to get out of their car. They would actually pop their trunk. The officers would take out the gun. They would look at it. They would point them forward, and then somebody would simply give them a gift card, hand them in the window, and they would just keep on going. So there was no get out of your car.
So one gift card per customer, not
one gift card per gun.
Oh,
Yeah.
per gun.
Although we did have somebody who came in. We had a guy who came in with a, I think he had like a camper or something like that. It was really like a gun store on wheels out in the valley, and so we tried to negotiate with him, and I think we got, I want to say we got 40 or 50 guns from him, but I think he took quite a few more with him. So we learned a little bit about how one thing that was very interesting is on Monday afterwards we had all of the guns in the parking lot of LAPD behind, and that was a pretty incredible sight to see that many guns all in one place at one time. Even one of the longtime Deputy Chief Beck said to me, he called me about 30 minutes before the press conference and said, "You got to get over here and see this. I've been in law enforcement 30-some years. I've never seen anything like this," which was great on the one hand, and yet you go, that's probably, in terms of the numbers, that's probably about the size of my tip of my pinky in terms of how many guns are out there. Yeah. So we live in a very well-armed society.
Some people say overly armed.
Some would say that. So we also, another initiative this year is Summer Night Lights, which I think both of you are very familiar with. There's been a lot of talk about that. We launch actually tomorrow night. It'll run from July 8th through September 5th. Last summer we had 8 sites. We have 16 sites this summer. There'll be 11 at city recreation and park facilities. There will be 4 in public housing developments, and there will be 1 at actually a public school site at the Belmont, or not the Belmont, the Roybal Learning Center in Rampart. So we actually
The Learning Center, is that one of the new sites?
Yeah, it's the new high school just across west of the 110 freeway. The budget for that is $2.8 million, of which we are raising half of that, $1.4 million, from private sector funds. We're at about, I think as of today, at about $900,000 of the $1.4 million. So we think we're going to get there. We have a lot of stuff.
The whole program costs $1.4 million?
2.8.
2.8.
Yeah. So we have the young people have all been hired. We have 160 youth, 17 to 20-year-olds who are actually at all 10 young people in each area who are being employed that make $3,500 from the summer. We have 2 site coordinators, which are graduate intern folks who actually are then helping run the sites, and then 1 what we call a community advocate, somebody from the neighborhood who's actually working at helping operate the site as well. And then we have a program manager from our office helping oversee that, and obviously the Rec and Parks.
And all the
Site
hirees,
Director.
such as the ones you described, the temporary summer hirees,
That's correct.
they're all through a third-party
Yeah,
organization?
they're all being employed through the Los Angeles Conservation Corps, who's our partner. So they do, they hire thousands of young people every year. And so,
And aside from that, it's my understanding that the Parks and Recs sites, or the actual sites, they actually have staff within their own jurisdiction that perhaps are getting more hours or what have you to fortify these sites.
That's correct. So
it's
we're
not just the temporary hires. It's
No.
also permanent employees that are actually fortifying their sites with their presence as well.
That's right. So we have up to, I believe it's $375,000 for Rec and Parks for overtime and additional, temporary staffing in each one of the Rec and Parks facilities. So there's resources there. We also have, we're contracting, Cultural Affairs is contracting with master artists in each of the locations. So we have artists doing work as well. And then we have intervention workers either through existing city-funded contracts or additional intervention workers in various parts of the where we have parks and sites as well. The WIA partnership, as you might recall, we actually, one of the issues we wanted to work on was how we could figure out how to use existing resources through our workforce investment system and actually create more collaboration between the community development department and that system and what we were doing in terms of working with gang-affiliated, gang-involved young people. In January and February of this year, we really launched getting the referrals that are going back and forth from our gang intervention contractors to the work source centers. That traditionally has been a system that hasn't always necessarily served the most at-risk young people in terms of gang involvement. So we wanted to both create a pipeline where we can get those young people into that system so they can start get training, but then also help be a resource to the workforce centers who may not have the experience necessarily to work with gang-involved youth. And so we have regular meetings between our gang intervention contractors and the workforce centers. We do that regionally with the Community Development Department to try and do that cross-fertilization. And we've done training both of the workforce and one-source centers around gang-involved youth and some of their special needs, as well as really educated the intervention providers around what the intake process and the eligibility process is, because there's a lot of eligibility factors for workforce investment dollars, to ensure that when they make those referrals and they've got the eligibility requirements met, that we can get these folks enrolled in the workforce system. To date, we've had a total of 144 referrals made by the intervention contractors with the grid office. Those have been 2 WorkSource and OneSource centers. Of those 144, 110 are actually now clients who are enrolled in the WI system for the city, and we have another 34 that actually are in the process of intake and orientation. And so once they're enrolled in the WI system, they'll receive the supportive services and such as case management, the job search assistance, educational and financial counseling, and actually the goal is to actually place some of those folks into jobs. So I think what this collaboration is doing, hopefully, again, helping us provide better collaboration and coordination between an already existing city-funded program to ensure that we get the right folks to take advantage of that. We've set a goal this year of having 10% of the clients for the WorkSource and OneSource centers be gang-affiliated or gang-involved youth that would be direct referrals from our city-funded intervention agencies, so that we can sort of reserve those slots for that population.
How's your percentage tracking so far?
Well, we started out a little slow. There's a lot of history of sort of, the WorkSource system saying, well, we never get the referrals, and then the intervention folks saying, well, we make the referrals and they never get enrolled because they don't want those kinds of young people because it screws up their outcomes. So, we've had to sort of by region, continue to push and sort of break down the sort of this sort of chasm that had sort of grown up over time.
So it's better today. Your understanding is it's better today, the
Absolutely.
snapshot of today, than 6 months ago or whatever.
Yeah, and I think it'll be better. I would say really, I'm giving you the last 6 months numbers, but my guess is from the reports I get that this has really picked up in the last 3 months. So even the last half of the last 6 months is really what's picked up. So I would expect next year we would hit that 500 number that we hope to hit. And then I think the question is, once we hit that number, the question is, is 10% enough of sort of a set aside for this population, or might we want to encourage the Workforce Investment Board to consider, if we can demonstrate that this population will come and participate in these training programs, might we want to consider 15% of the total? There's about 5. The system has the capacity to do, serious case management and the kind of wraparound services through the jobs program, WIA system, of about 5,000 young adults, young people citywide. So the question would be, might you want to push that percentage up as a percentage to help this population? The Los Angeles Violence Intervention Training Academy is something else we've been working very hard on the last 6 months. We did a thorough evaluation of the curriculums that have been developed by the Pat Brown Institute at Cal State LA, Maximum Force Enterprises, and the Advancement Project, and really looked at how they support the 5 areas of competency that we really believe need to guide the community intervention training curriculum. And those 5 areas of competency are direct practice, personal development, concrete tasks, broader policy, and applied theory. And so as part of that process, in early March, we brought together folks from the Advancement Project, from a Better LA Foundation, which is doing some training and also funding training, folks from Maximum Force Enterprises, and then also from Pat Brown, to really establish sort of a curriculum committee that was chaired by our office to start pulling that together. The committee approved the concept of the 5 areas of competency, as well as an outline and structure for the development of the curriculum and the training that would be done by the proposed academy. In June, the first draft of the structure of the academy and the proposed curriculum was presented and approved by all our partners. And so we expect to actually have a final recommended structure and a plan completed to transmit to council within the next 30 days. So that's about ready to go. And then the goal will be to actually have the academy up and running with an initial class later this fall. And then the last,
More like September or October?
it depends on how long once the transmittal gets done, how long it takes to go through that process. So I would hope, if that's a smooth process or relatively quickly, we could do that maybe in September. If it takes a while, it might be October.
And the class sizes are anticipated to be roughly?
About 30 per session. So far, we're looking at about 30. We're looking at doing 2 introductory courses per year. That would be about 30 per class. So it would give us a capacity to do 60. And then we're looking at offering 6 20 to 25-hour seminar modules, which would be take some of the modules that are in the introductory training that you might cover in 4 to 6 hours. You would actually do a larger module of those, and they would be 20 to 25 hours. So, for example, how do you do intervention in a hospital emergency room? That's like one proposed in the curriculum. It's probably 4 to 6 hours during the 105-hour introductory course. Well, you could easily build a 20 to 25-hour module about how you do that. You could take people to the hospital emergency room, connect it to the medical professionals there. How does an emergency room operate? What are the protocols in terms of when someone is shot? All those kinds of things. And then how do you really help them understand when they walk into a emergency room at a hospital, how can they do the work we want them to do, which is to figure out how to get to the friends, the family, the folks who may be very volatile in those situations, and try and alternate them away from any potential revenge and things like that. So we're planning on doing 6 of those kind of in-depth seminars per year. And so one of the requirements for certification, if you're going to be a city certified intervention agency, would be that you would either be enrolled in or actually have completed the 101 course, if you will. And then to maintain your certification, you'd have to take 2 of the 6 in-depth seminars on an annual basis, in almost like a continuing education program.
Sure.
Yeah, just on this Intervention Academy. So again, you must complete this to be a city certified intervention worker.
That's one of the things. We have a whole bunch of stuff.
Right, but I mean, just the academy. So obviously there's people who probably have never done this work that now are seeing it as something that's legitimate, that, there's actually, a process you can go through. You can actually learn how to do it. You kind of don't need the sort of license to operate in a way that used to be the only credentials on the street for an intervention worker, is what I'm saying. I guess what I'm getting to is there any difference in how this academy would treat someone who really has been an intervention worker for 10 years versus someone who's going, okay, this is an interesting line of work, something I think I could do.
Well, we have some folks who
they feel like they've kind of already learned all this stuff.
Well, we do have some folks who've there's a handful of people that have probably been through every training program that's been operated to date, and some of them been through them multiple times. So I think what we're trying to do is to take the best from all of those and come up with a standardized curriculum. There's going to be a curriculum. Our plan is to have like a curriculum committee, and then also almost like a professional standards board that would be kind of like in the bar or something like that, kind of a version of that we would have some folks who would look at that. So if you've been through every training program and you can demonstrate some...
Well, but basically, you've been an intervention worker. You've been in the hospital rooms.
Yeah, and some of the folks...
Shot at one point, it was in a hospital, so you know the protocol on when somebody gets shot.
Well, I would say that some of the folks who may have experience may not necessarily be completely... they could still use some training. Just because you've been doing this for 5 or 10 years doesn't necessarily mean that you've ever gotten the opportunity to get all the skills necessary to be professional. And I think our feeling is even if you've been you've been doing this for 10 years, to maintain some sort of certification requires some continuing education. We feel like that's part of what we want folks to do. If you're really going to raise the bar and professionalize the field of intervention, there's got to be some sort of continuing ongoing education. It's not like you go through one class and then that's it.
And just to follow up on them, obviously there's, those out there that love the stories about, someone who's an intervention worker that finds themselves on the wrong side of the law again. How, do we think this will sort of address that problem or prevent that problem or lessen that problem or...
Well, I'm not sure you can completely insulate yourself from any of that. Just like this is a human profession, just like most of life is. And, unfortunately, when you have human beings involved in an enterprise, those human beings make decisions. And sometimes they make decisions at one point in time that are moving in a positive direction, and at some point something goes wrong and they make other decisions. And that happens in the field of business, it happens in the field of law enforcement, it happens in politics, and it happens in intervention. And so I wouldn't be prepared to say that we're creating a foolproof system, but we are creating some sort of sense of screens to try and minimize the possibilities of that. So what we've done for any intervention worker that's going to be certified, in essence, by the city, number one is they're going to have to go through a background check. Again, and we've already started that process. We've done lots of background checks already for the current intervention workers that are on our city contracts. And again, it's not that we expect someone to not have a background necessarily. It's just we want to know what that background is. How recent is that background? What's happened since that background was rather active? So then we can actually make decisions about the level of risk that we're willing to take, as opposed to just the sort of wild, wild west system that we've had now, which there was no structure to that. Second thing is everyone who's going to be certified has to submit to drug testing, to random drug testing. That's part of the process as well. Then additionally, you have to go through the training academy. As part of the training academy, there's a unit on what's called the LSI, which is like a criminogenic assessment tool, which actually helps folks understand their own criminogenic needs and triggers, especially if most of these folks have actually been involved in criminal activity in the past. It helps them understand how their own mind works, so that when they understand the triggers that actually got them in those situations, that they can actually help figure out how to alternate that behavior, because we believe that your mind controls your behavior. So if you can figure out how to unpack what's going on in your mind, then you can actually ensure that, try and improve your behavior. And then we've actually, all the city-funded grid contractors now have once they've gone through that process, we actually are getting them badges that has an independent design. Those have a expiration date on them. They all have a white and a black grid polo shirts that we've gotten them, as well as nice jackets. So now
What's
when
the expiration date for a badge?
a year.
A year.
Yeah. And so
And then do they have to go back
you have
through
to go back. You have
the
to
whole program?
No, you
or
have to just make sure that you've actually
all classes?
you've gone through the ongoing training. So if you had to take the 2 modules and you've continued to be a part of that process, you would continue to keep your certification. So
So there's some accountability.
yeah. So again, that's not a foolproof system that's going to stop somebody who decides to make decisions that are moving in a negative direction. But it's substantially more, I would argue, than what we've ever had in the city before.
Okay.
The last thing is just the safe passages. We've been working on safe passages, which I think we've learned is really more of a concept or a definition of a type of work than probably is frankly a fully developed or consolidated program. As we've been doing the research with this with our partners, which has been the CCYF, the LAPD, and LAUSD, and City Attorney, there's really a lot of different types of safe passages program, both previously and current safe passages programs or efforts that are operating in LA, really in more of an ad hoc manner, both within city departments and in local communities, and actually in the county as well. So, the implementation of these programs really varies from location to location, and a lot of them don't work in probably as more of a collaborative way as we would like, I think, in the city in terms of those resources. So we're continuing to work with our partners to develop a program that really is a community-based approach and it's highly focused and targeted around a common definition of goals and objectives that we want to achieve. And so we hope to maximize both city and non-city resources within the neighborhoods and schools here in LA that are highest risk for potential safety concerns. Obviously, as we've said before, one of the primary things that all of the needs assessments identified in all the target areas. So we want the approach to be both flexible but also and tailored to each community's needs and realities, but to have some sort of standardization for that. So we hope to focus specifically in addressing the different issues that are faced by both elementary, middle schools, and high schools, because those are all 3 different animals. And we're floating a name of LA Pass, which would be Los Angeles Providing Access to School Safely program, and we expect to have a draft program design completed.
What's wrong with safe passages?
Well, I think our desire is to rebrand it, just because what you mean by safe passages and what somebody else means by safe passages is different from what someone else means by safe passages, and we think if we give something a new name, and then we define what we mean by that. We're actually going to have a definition. We've been working on a definition of what we mean by safe passages. What would be sort of the protocols? What would that look like in different neighborhoods in terms of some standards, so that we can actually then have a way to measure it.
Will that be in the budget? Because I mean, that is one of the things that I think got orphaned in the mayor's gang reduction program, was safe passages. And I know I've had to scrounge, and I know I've worked with Tony too, to find money to fund the one safe passage, in Watts.
Yeah, right now we don't have any budget item for that, so I think that.
I really think, and I would think studies would back me up on, that is a treacherous route for many kids, and that's many times where they do get recruited to join a gang, or just to give them safe passage.
Yeah.
So I mean, I was kind of disappointed that seemed like it was orphaned in the mayor's program. And again, I've worked on finding money in the budget. I've worked in my own funds, tried to find money to fund it, because to me, from what I get back in Watts, that's just a key component for a lot of kids in that community.
Well, I think we'll have we're looking at a sort of multiple layered, so you could have in some cases it might be an appropriate place to do a volunteer-driven approach,
Yeah.
with appropriate
Sure,
supports.
we tried that, it didn't work.
And then in other places, that won't work. It will require some sort of direct service approach. And I think what we're trying to do is develop some criteria for how you do an assessment to determine which
Think
one.
we'll have that in place by September?
We hope to have a report back to you all with a draft that then we can start the conversation of how to do that.
No money to fund it.
We don't have any money in the budget that I know of, unless you know of some money that was put in the budget that I'm unaware of at this point. And we need to figure out how many sites we might pilot and things like that. So I think that's going to be the conversation we want to have as soon as we transmit.
Yeah, I think that's a real issue in Watts, as you know.
CDD used to provide the funding for safe passages, not every single one, but the vast majority of safe passages were being provided by CDD. CDD had the habit annually towards
Using
the second half
savings.
of the year to use their savings, and it
Right.
would flush out to enough to continue to run most of the safe passages in the communities that were familiar with them and that had that service. But the big difference now is that the savings that grew out of the current system that we have, the motion just went through this committee last week to put it into the
Summer Night Lights.
Summer Night Lights.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the big differences. But still, what needs to happen first and foremost is a formalization of what safe passages should be. And again, every safe passage is going to have its differences, but there should be a menu of services that define what safe passages is. And that way, if somebody's going to call it, what did you call it, pass?
LA Pass.
LA Pass.
Yeah.
LA Pass, rolling forward, then it won't be considered an LA Pass site or around a school unless it has enough of the components for it to pass the muster of saying this is a real facilitated program, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing is we're almost done with our sort of internal draft of this stuff. But obviously then we need to talk to the school district, because it doesn't make sense for us to draft our own internal idea of what a safe passages program looks like and not have
Well,
engaged the school district as part of that
And that's
process
another
as well.
thing. The school district has been delinquent, in my opinion, in providing resources for safe passages and a lot of other programs that facilitate the health and welfare of their own kids,
Yeah, it's their
which are our
schools. We're
kids.
trying to get them-
It's their
yeah,
school,
it's their
our
school. We're
kids,
trying to
our
get them
community, their
safe
community, et cetera. But they've been extremely delinquent in offering opportunities to do that. I talked to when Roy Romer was the superintendent, and I had a great relationship with him, and I just asked him to help out with one safe passages. It wasn't even in my district. I did it at a request out of another council member's area. So I called him. He answered the phone. We talked, caught up a little bit, told him what I was calling about, said he would look into it, and he very embarrassingly let me know that he couldn't find any money.
Yeah.
The bureaucrats at LAUSD are phenomenal. Even when the superintendent tries to tell him, can we squeeze $50,000 out of somewhere? They told him no.
I think what we're trying to look at is, I mean, in any one of these neighborhoods, when you start, you dissect it, as you all know, problems from the neighborhood, kids bring those onto the school campus.
And
So
vice
now
versa.
it's a school campus problem. So now that is under the jurisdiction of the school district.
Mm-hmm.
But then obviously problems occur on the school campus during the course of the day, and then those problems
Mm-hmm.
trickle out into the neighborhood, and then there are problems. So there really has to be a true partnership between the schools and the community to ensure that we're on top of this, all the time. And so that's what we're trying to come up with, a mix of how do we identify and what are we asking the schools to do, especially if the city is going to invest, even if it's a volunteer, driven program, that still has a cost for us to maintain and operate something like that. So we're investing resources. We need to have some sort of partnership,
Well, you
even
also need
kind
to
through
know
the
there's a
school.
direct relationship to the dropout rate. I mean,
And that's their ADA. That's where they get their
when
money.
kids start to become truant, guaranteed it's been on the way to school.
That certainly is contributing to that,
and,
no question.
And again, that's when they start to stray, and then they get harassed, and then they get join a gang. And the next thing you know, they've dropped out of school. So I mean, there is a direct relationship in my
Right.
mind between safe passage and their overall dropout and good attendance. So I'm surprised they don't make that connection.
We're hoping they will start.
Well, it's one thing to try to collaborate with LAUSD, which I have found is not impossible, but very difficult at times. One of the things that hoping you can bring us up to speed on is the county is working toward an effort where they have their zones as well. Some are overlapping, some are not, but they're doing what they're kind of a couple years behind us just in timing-wise. I'm not
Sure.
saying in performance or what have you, but timing-wise, they're doing basically what we've been doing in the city as far as reharnessing and reevaluating how they're going to deal with these issues on a prevention, intervention, reentry / level, not just on a suppression level. So that being the case, how is it going with collaborating with the county?
Well, we're doing our best to, as you know, I'm on the committee, represent the city on the committee, and I participate in all those meetings. We have actively engaged in that, both at the sort of macro level with the CEO's office, but then also in neighborhoods as well. They've identified 4 target areas, of which 3 overlap in the city. One is Monrovia and Duarte, which is not in the city. The 3 that are in the city, actually, there's one in sort of the Florence Firestone area, overlaps into the city in both our 77th
So you got police
Florence
officers
Graham.
and sheriffs who are
That's right.
having to deal with
And in Newton, in that area. Then we have another overlapping area in the Harbor Gateway area. They encompass both the unincorporated parts of the county on either side of the little sliver that's in the city. And then we actually have a perfect overlay zone in Pacoima out in the valley. So they actually chose their 4th location out in the valley. It's the map is exactly the same. So, for example, in Pacoima, what we did is we were actually forming an local advisory committee for our grid zone out in the valley, and we agreed to have that be collapsed with the county group that's meeting, because it's going to be the same people
Good.
that you would meet, so to not have those poor folks have to
Meet
twice a week on
Talk about the same thing.
Exactly. I would say in terms of where the county's at, they just completed their audit, fiscal audit of all their programs, similar to what was done. So they've now got $140-some million worth of programs that they've categorized. There's actually a DVD that you could get a copy of from the CEO's office that actually is pretty interactive. You can go through and look at every single program and how much was spent. I think there's still questions on the county's part about how you categorize programs. What do we mean? And so one of the last meetings we talked about is, what do we mean? What's our definition for intervention, prevention? What do we mean by gang crime and gang-involved youth and gang-motivated crime? So we're starting to have some actually good conversations about about definitions about things, because I think in some cases there's not necessarily agreement on definitions. We've offered up. I actually wrote the CEO a letter on behalf of the grid cabinet about making some suggestions, like, for example, we said we would share with them the youth services eligibility tool as a means for them to use as a screening process for determining eligibility. We also gave them some definitions around intervention, the two-pronged approach, and how we could use that as a basis to collaborate on in terms of if the county was going to fund that, use the same approach that we're doing here in the city. We haven't gotten a response from that yet as to whether or not they want to do that or not. So I would say it's moving slowly. I believe they're supposed to report back to the supervisors sometime in August. I don't know if they're going to hit that deadline or not, but I think that's their target date, is to go back to the supervisors in August. It might be September. And I think it's, from my perspective, I think the jury's still out in terms of what it is they're going to ultimately do. They are doing some collaboration. They're going to bring some county services actually to Pacoima, to Summer Night Lights, to the park there. I think some mental health resources and public health resources this summer. So, we'll see. It's a slow process.
Okay, and in your report, you don't cover or mention an evaluation of the accessibility or the barriers that or critical services that still have yet to be provided. When I mention that, for example, mental health, we don't control mental health services in the city. We're subject to the county, their funding, the resources, who they contract with in our various communities. So how are we working through those barriers or those limitations? Again, to a certain degree, they're beyond our control.
Right.
But we still have the responsibility to identify if we have some shortcomings of services or we have something that we don't control. How are we going to bridge that gap and get those resources to our constituents?
Well, that's one reason I participate in the county executive oversight committee, because we're trying to actually get those resources. I think one of the things at the last meeting, there was a conversation about the ceasefire program in Boston, different than the ceasefire program in Chicago. There's a lot of ceasefire programs. They're all a little different. The Sheriff's Department has been doing a version, I guess you could say it's a version of that.
Their own version.
Their own version out in Palmdale. They send a letter out basically telling gang-involved, gang-affiliated youth that if they commit crimes, here's what could happen to them. And then, by the way, here's a list of phone numbers you could call if you wanted to get help. They suggest that that's had an impact out there. The way that's done in Boston is actually they identify in a particular area gang-involved young people who they believe are actually committing a significant number of the crimes. They will actually call them, get them to come to a meeting, but then they will actually have all of the service providers in the room at the same time and say basically a carrot and a stick message. If you continue to commit crimes, we will arrest you. We're watching you. We know who you are. But if you want a way out of that, here's the job training folks. Here's the people right here, not make a phone call. They're right here, right now. Get the help you need for your family to do that.
Who's taking the lead on that in the LA County?
Well, the sheriff has done a version of this out in Lancaster, Palmdale area. They've done a
letter.
They've done a letter. And they shared that at the last meeting. I actually suggested that maybe we consider, because Bill Fujioka had suggested that while we're doing the planning process, we ought to find ways to do something now. And I took that as an opportunity to say, this is something we could do right now, because it doesn't cost any more money. We just got to get your departments. I'm sure LAPD and the Sheriff's Department can identify who those 40 or 50 people are in these different areas. Then, you all, Mr. CEO, in theory, control the departments here. You all could order the departments to be a resource, and we could start making these connections right now. So I'm actually going to Boston in, I think it's September or October, to speak at a university, and I've been arranged some meetings to meet with some of the folks who are doing the Boston version of ceasefire. I'm having a meeting with David Kennedy next week from Harvard, who's actually the person who actually piloted that in Boston, to find out more about how they did the Boston ceasefire project and how we might use that as a means to get the county to do that. So my goal would be is if we could get the county to do a version of that in one of their 4 target areas, and we can see how it works, then that's sort of the leverage to say, well, if we could do it in one of your target areas, maybe we could do it in 12 of our target areas as well, to start making the connection. So, but that's if I had the ability to direct them, it would be a lot easier, but unfortunately we don't have that jurisdiction, so we have to sort of
Okay. Well, in future reports, if you could outline the litany of services that were, and I don't mean this critical of the county or of the city, but the services that seem to be trickling in, thank God, and being more involved in serving our youth, the people at risk here. If we could do that, that way we can start having our benchmarks. In 2009, the activity of certain services was kind of minuscule. And in 2010, it became more involved. And I think what happens when we do that is hopefully we're not the only ones looking at this report. Hopefully people at the county are looking at this report. And then when we mention some of the services that are well within their purview, and we start pointing out that it's really not, we're really not accessing those services at the rate that we all know those constituents should, hopefully they'll start to want to talk to us and say, wait a minute, I think we can do better. I think we can actually get those services out there a little bit more. You get what I'm saying?
Uh-huh. No, that's great.
Because I can see when I look at your report and I see all the elements that you covered, a lot of it is not confined to what we control, but it really is focusing on the things that we control. But there's so many things that we don't control, but they're part of the lifestyle that we need to provide for these
Sure.
people.
I think our intent has been to make sure to start with the things we control.
Exactly.
Ensure that we can do those well before we go pointing fingers at folks that we don't control their resources, but we can say, here's what we're doing in the city. We would like to have you.
And I'll go to you, but that's the difference between them taking it personal as though we're pointing at them versus just pointing out some facts. That's all.
Sure.
Just,
No, but I think it's a good suggestion.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of go up global. I mean, it's amazing to me that we actually even sit here and talk about this and have updated reports on, the mayor's office of gang reduction and youth development. I mean, it's, again, we used to tout it as, the first time we've ever in the city really had, a deputy mayor charge of this. First time we've ever had a comprehensive strategy on how to, reduce the stranglehold of gang violence in Los Angeles. So just globally, we got it right. What's your biggest obstacle? I hope you say resources. And, if you had more money, would we just increase what we're doing? Would we go after, something completely different? I mean, what, do we have it right? What are we doing? And would we do better if we had more resources?
I think of course I'm going to tell you I think we're doing right. Do I think we're doing everything right? Probably not. I think what we're going to do, though, is we're trying to be in our office reflective along the way, to pause and to reflect on what we're doing well and what we're not doing so well, and then make improvements. I think Summer Night Lights is a good example of what we did last summer. We learned a lot. We made significant changes. The core concept and the philosophy of what we're doing in terms of turning a public asset in a rec and park facility, a public housing development, and a school. In most of these neighborhoods, there are not a lot of assets like that, physical infrastructure assets. And unfortunately, the public assets, physical assets that we have are often the magnets for the problem. So it's been intuitive to me to say, there are assets in the public. How do we take those back in some ways? How do we make them safe? And then how do we seed them with the kind of productive, positive activities to do that? So I hope we'll learn along the way.
I mean, obviously, I'm very committed to trying to put it again before the voters, asking them if they would be willing to invest in exactly what you're talking about, which is investing in kids on the front end of their lives, hoping that we won't, pay for it in so many other ways on the back end. But you think you would have enough data, enough facts, enough we have got it right. We've got our programs in place. We've got accountability. We have reform that really the LA Times would finally give their stamp of approval to that proposition if we put it before the voters again. Because that was obviously the criticism last
Yeah.
that we didn't have enough kind of under our belt to actually,
The LA Times just didn't understand what we were talking about.
I
That's
know.
the problem.
I know.
Well, I'll let the
I'm
LA
just
Times.
wondering, do you
I'll let
think
the LA
you-
Times speak for themselves
Yeah,
about
I mean,
what they would
you think
endorse. I think
time
we're.
around-
Yeah, I think we're on the right. I absolutely think we're on
I
the
believed
right
it
path.
before you had the data, so, but I do think there was a lot out there that, we're wondering whether or not
I think we're on the.
we could handle 30 million a year.
I think we're on the right path. I think we've laid the foundation for success. I think we're going to evaluate that. We're going to have an independent evaluator tell us what's working, what isn't work. So it's not just me coming to here and telling you what I think. There'll be an outside independent group to tell us that. And I do think ultimately we are going to need further investments, in this process.
I mean,
Both
we're
probably
scraping for, as you said, 2.4 million for Summer Night Lights. I mean,
inside these targeted areas, but obviously, as we've talked about in the past, not all of the gang violence in the city of Los Angeles is concentrated in those 12 areas. Those 12 areas have higher levels
Right.
than anywhere else in the
right.
city.
But we only have 12 areas because we have limited
resource
resources.
dollars, exactly. So
We would have more areas if we had more money.
I think, though, in terms of when you ask me some of the challenges, I think, changing sort of the culture of how we approach this work is one challenge. There's sort of,
Have we changed?
I think we're in the process of changing that, and that'll take some, that'll continue to take some, tough love and accountability, and I think people are beginning to understand that we were serious about what we said we were going to do in terms of hold people accountable. And I think just the way people, for example, I can say this because I ran a nonprofit that worked with kids. People sort of have their program, and it's like, well, we do our program and we know our program works. Well, the research suggests that there are very specific risk factors that really are the ones that contribute to kids making a decision about joining a gang. Well, if you really want to stop or prevent a kid
Right.
from joining a gang, I'm not sure just your program in general is the approach. We really need to get agencies to start thinking about, well, what exactly is my program addressing in terms of this menu of risk factors?
Right.
Is it really, and so you start, and one of the things about our information system is that in this new web-based information system that will have every contact, and you'll remember that they're required to have a minimum of 3 face-to-face contacts per week with each young person. As part of the case management and the tracking of that, they will have to actually not just track that they had a contact, but they will have to link that contact to what's the specific risk factor that contact was actually
Address.
intended to address. So it will no longer just be, well,
Right.
they came to our center after school.
Right.
Well, that's a good thing. If
Right.
they're at your center, they're probably not out getting in trouble.
Right.
But what is it that they did at your center that actually we think is going to build the protective
Right.
factors in the life of that kid that will stop them from joining a gang? So
Right.
now then we can start tracking and see what risk factors we're identifying and how we're actually developing programs.
Which-
But that's a new way of thinking.
Well, what that was kind of the premise for the advancement project. It was kind of, there's a whole host of things. If you really want to look at the whole child and what causes them to join a gang, there's everything from poverty to health to
Abuse.
there's this, and you're right, not necessarily one program will
Right.
take in.
So now we have a
Except
system
for
in
gap.
place. Now we have a system in place that we can actually track that and monitor that. So
Build
we'll be able to build on that over time. So I think we're
Right.
doing well.
Just remind you guys, just this, the little $1.8 million that you're raising for the Summer Nights Lights program. If you'd-
1.4.
If you'd have raised that for Measure A, it would have passed.
Well,
I
not.
just had to say that.
Of course, not everyone who's giving me the 1.4 million would have given us
Oh,
to
that? You didn't ask him. Okay, anyway.
I did ask some
Oh,
people,
okay,
So
whatever.
the,
and I will ask them again in the future. You know I will, Councilwoman.
the Urban Institute, that item's not agenda.
If they believe in Summer Nights Lights, then they would believe in the concept
There-
of having
but-
more
but-
Summer Nights Lights.
But that's why we need to evaluate things. That's why we need to start putting more things on the record. There's certain departments in this country that just, everybody takes it for granted that when things go well, they could take credit. When things go bad, they have an explanation why they went bad. And I'm talking about the suppression departments. But when it comes to intervention and prevention, unfortunately, people always say, yeah, but how do you know? It's a touchy-feely thing. There's no facts. Well, we're developing the facts. And luckily, there are other spots around this country where they are, in fact, evaluating and pulling together facts and showing what's working, what's not working, et cetera. So hopefully we'll be in a better place to go to the voters and talk to them about how smart this is and how good it is for them, the taxpayer, and also for the constituent.
I think what's great is that now you have a lot of people from other parts of the country and other cities that are actually looking to Los Angeles for how they go about. They're calling us or they're coming. The Attorney General will likely be here next week. Partly for his visit will be to come out and find out and sit down and talk about what it is we're actually doing. So I think that bodes well. Unfortunately, we've been sort of the poster child for what was wrong in this country around the issues of youth and gangs and gang violence.
Gang capital.
And so I think now it is exciting to me that people are starting to look to us and say, how are you guys doing? How are you doing intervention? Tell me more about this two-pronged approach. What are you doing? How's that work with law enforcement? What are you doing on prevention? Tell us about your assessment tool that you're using. What's that based on? And so, we're piloting some things here that I think other parts of the country are eventually going to mimic. And I think that's a good thing, because if we can figure out how to do it here, obviously the scale of the problem here is unlike anywhere else in the country.
And our approach right now is not close to the scale that it needs to be.
Absolutely. We're just
We
scratching the
really
surface.
want to finally grow up a generation of kids that are not going to join a gang. It has to be.
I agree with that.
We have to just, 100-fold what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Every kid in LA County needs to be reached before they turn 10.
So the Urban Institute, when it comes to evaluating the effectiveness and the successes and the challenges that are facing the mayor's office in running our citywide program, or be in charge of, and when it comes to our long-term approach, are they looking to evaluate that as well? Or they
Yeah, they're actually, I think I mentioned, they're going to do both a formative evaluation in terms of are people implementing the model that we've set up, and are they adhering to that, and what's the impact of that. They're also going to look at outcomes. Are we actually, is crime being reduced? Are the numbers of young people actually declining in terms of gang joining? The kids that are actually in these prevention programs, are more kids, God forbid if more kids that are in the programs are actually, more of them are joining gang than kids that are not involved in these programs, or something like that. So they're evaluating that. And then they're also doing a cost-benefit analysis. So they're actually looking at what is it costing in these areas and what kind of benefit we're getting in terms of
But also, are they going to be looking at that's all at the program level and the implementation level, on the street level, what you just described. Are they going to take a step back and look at our structure? Because this is all new to us. We have a new structure. We have a elected office handling it. There was debate 3 years ago, 4 years ago, even when Martin Ludlow was here 4 years ago. Should it be in the mayor's office? Should it be a department? Should we just shake up a current department and revamp it? You get what I'm saying? And here we are. We've created a structure. We're running with it. We have it in place. We're doing it. Are they going to be looking from a bird's eye point of view from our structure on down to what you just described, down to the street level?
I don't know that they're looking at they're evaluating whether or not, for example, this should be in the mayor's office or it should be a department or anything like that. I don't think that they see that as the purveyance of their evaluation. I think
But the structure.
Well, I think they're going to look at how are we actually delivering services. Are those services being delivered in a coherent manner, in a strategic way, in these target areas, and is it having the intended effect? And then are people adhering to the program model that we've set up? And then they're going to do a cost-benefit analysis to say, is that a cost-effective way to do it, or is there another way that it could be done? So I think no, they're not 100% doing probably what you're asking, but I think some of that will be reflected in some of their evaluation. And so we plan on actually getting, multiple, it's not just going to be like 3 years from now we're going to get sort of an evaluation. We've asked them for regular updates, and we will certainly share those updates with you all in council.
All right. So at a structural basis, they will be evaluating on a structural basis. I understand how it's neither here nor there with them as to whether or not it's in the mayor's office, a separate department, or what have you. That's not even a debate right now. But the thing is, as far as the structure, because I think that has to do with the cost effectiveness as well. The basic dynamic and tone of the day-to-day is set through your team, Jeff Carr's team. I'm not talking about the mayor's office. I'm talking about Jeff Carr's team, you have Jeff Carr.
Well, the mayor, I work for the
people
mayor.
Yeah, but the thing is that you're part of that structure.
Sure.
The mayor isn't in charge of somebody under you or what have you. You're in charge of everybody. That's what I'm saying. In essence, there's a structure. You're not a department head, but you're at the head of this structure. And then you have people under you, and they have people under them, and then you have people out in the field, et cetera. So that's what I'm talking about. Are they going to be looking at that as well?
I don't know exactly. I mean, that they would be looking at that structure directly, except as how it impacts and how it's a
Exactly.
part of.
Because you have interaction.
larger-
At some level, there's paper interaction, there's verbal interaction, there's field interaction with your team.
Yeah,
and
I
your
think-
team is not a contracted out team. Your
Right.
team is part of the structure that is now defining how we're handling this issue on a macro scale.
Well, particularly, I do think to the extent that, the program managers, we sort of have two sides of our office. One is the sort of contract management, planning, administration side, and then the program manager side, which is really more the operational side. I would imagine that the program managers, because part of their job and role is to really be out there in the communities, making the connections and trying to connect the dots between various resources and the agencies, ensuring the agencies are doing a good job of outreaching to find the right youth and so on and so forth. They're responding to incidences along with intervention workers and making the connections when necessary with law enforcement and trying to buffer that on occasion. So to the extent that our program managers are engaged in the work, I think that will be definitely be a part of the evaluation because they're sort of in the mix.
Exactly.
I
They
would
do
say-
have the closer they get the closer people get to the ground, the more involvement they have with
Sure.
with what's actually happening
Yeah.
on a day-to-day basis.
So I would say that particular layer of people in our office, they'll definitely, I think that will be reflected in terms of their involvement.
Okay. Now, the Urban Institute is going to be conducting numerous interviews and interactions with a lot of players in and around this issue, but it doesn't seem to mention or infer that they're going to be doing interviews or conducting any correspondence with the council offices. Obviously, we have some council offices that don't tend to spend a lot of time on this issue, but we do have some council offices like Janice Hahn talks about a lot, what's going on in Watts and things of that nature. Heavy-duty interaction with the office. For example, herself, when you look at the Watts Gang Task Force, very engaged. Her staff is very engaged. Are they going to be trying to gain feedback from the council offices as well?
I don't know the details of who they're going to interview lots of people. Obviously, they're going to be looking at clients for the prevention agencies and the intervention agencies. They're going to be getting data from LAPD. I think I mentioned in our report there. They're going to be doing some sort of community survey. They're still trying to figure out they're discussing sort of methodologies in terms of what's the best methodology that has the best approach. I can certainly suggest that they speak to council offices as part of their, soliciting feedback from that. That would be certainly part. I don't think that's going to be the primary focus of their evaluation necessarily, but
It's my understanding that they're going to create a litany of interviews and information and sources and resources to gather from. I believe that should be one of them. Again, and I'm choosing my words carefully. I believe that should be one of them. Obviously, it's up to them what formula they want to use and where they
Sure.
want to go.
I'm happy to make that suggestion.
Thank you. Who sits on the independent working group?
We have, I think it's about 5 or 6 individuals, and we can get you those names. I don't have those off the top of my head.
That'd be great. Thank you. Well, when it comes to the case management and data collection system, eventually you're going to be working toward a set aside of 5% of the overall budget to sustain that.
Yeah, what we've asked for every agency, both intervention and prevention, is that they dedicate 5% of their overall budget to data collection and evaluation. So,
And that was mentioned in the original RFPs, right?
yeah. So that can be a combination of, like this year, we use some of our savings to cover there's a license and annual licensing fee for how many terminals that you use. So you could have 5 case managers, but if those case managers, only 3 of them are likely to be online at the same time, you really only need 3 licenses, annual licenses for the system. So we're going to purchase, I think it's 2 or 3 for the first year for them, and then ask them to pay that out of their 5% in the future. But then they can also use that money for data collection. So they can actually use to, if they have somebody in their office that their job is just to enter, whatever the data point is, they can actually use it to pay for that salary person as well.
And are they going to get referred to or reminded that there are people who do data collection and accumulation of information kind of like for a living? Especially when you look at universities, they have people that's what they do. But a lot of these not-for-profits, they're more involved in the day-to-day. They're out
Right.
there, on the streets trying to get things done, interacting with constituents. Are they going to be reminded that they need to ask questions when they're wondering, okay, I know I got to get this data, or I have a bunch of information. How do I compile it? How do I organize it? What is relevant? What's not?
Well, we actually, one of the things we went to, we asked UI, Urban Institute, for a code, in essence, a code book. So what's the data points that they're going to need, that they want to get in terms of from the agencies? So as much of that as possible that's not sort of interview narrative based, but is it just raw data that they want to collect? We're actually building that into the grid information, web-based training information system. So there would be, there are certain things like you couldn't do an entry unless you fulfill all of the basic information. And the nice thing about this case management system that we're purchasing is we will build the basic system. So you have to, there's a minimum amount of information that they're going to be required to keep for our purposes, but it's very customizable. And so once the agencies actually, if there's other things they want to track or keep for their own purposes, a lot of agencies don't have the kind of data tracking system and capability. They can actually customize this system to fit their own purposes. If there's particular programs they want to track or things they do that it'd be on top of what we're asking them to do, they'll actually have the flexibility to do that. So, and then they'll all be trained, obviously, in that data collection system. And then part of our reason for our last, when we went out and did the monitoring visits in April, actually the Urban Institute, in June, the Urban Institute folks on the ground here, which is Harder and Company, they have assigned folks who are their on-ground people for each one of the grid zones. And so we actually took them with us and gave them an introduction to the local agency. They gave them some information about the basic kinds of data that they're going to be coming to them for, so they can start getting accustomed to know what they're going to be tracking as well. And then we'll be doing training.
Getting accustomed to that is something that I wanted to make sure that they understood.
Yeah.
Because in the past, even the city of Los Angeles, when we contracted through CDD, a lot of the intervention prevention work, a lot of that information that we expect today, they weren't being asked that in the past.
Yeah. Well, we're asking them that, and that's certainly the first step, is to ensure that we ask them for what it is, tell them what it is we're going to want from them. And then the second step is to hold them accountable to actually get you that information. And if they don't, then to ensure that they understand their ramifications to that.
Sure, it's part of their contract.
It's part of their contract.
Good. And it's part of our responsibility, too.
Absolutely.
Because that's what we shared with the public, that we were going to hold organizations accountable.
And we are.
Good. When it comes to the Youth Service Eligibility Tool, otherwise known as the YSET, as part of the consent process on behalf of the youth or the client, they're assured that their responses are kept to the organization and that it's on a need-to-know basis. But how far does that go, and what would it take for someone else unexpectedly to say, we have a right to that information?
Well, for example, on the right now, that let's say an agency does an assessment of a young person, so they actually score their assessment tool. Actually, the assessment actually has a number. So when they send that assessment actually to USC, who does the scoring on it, there's no name attached to it, so there's just a number. So the only folks who actually have the name and the number to make that connection is the case manager and the local agency. So they have the, they have the ability to maintain that confidentiality. We've actually worked with, I think we had a meeting with the Public Defender's Office and they're actually developing they suggested, and we thought it was a good suggestion, that we develop a protocol in the event that if a zealous agency or attorney or district attorney, prosecutorial agency decided they wanted to try and subpoena those records, that we have a set of protocols as to what's actually required to be able to share with and what cannot be, that we wouldn't have to be required. So they're actually working
So they
on
can
it.
actually get some advice
Yeah,
as an agency saying, hey, we got a call from somebody
That's
who
right.
says he's with the FBI. They wanted information on 3 people. What should we do?
here's what you're required to do, and here's what you should do. Here's the way you should respond. So we're going to actually have they're helping us create a document to do that, and then actually we will, they've agreed to help us actually train the agencies and all the case managers down the road so they would actually know how to respond to that.
We can't lose sight of that, because when those guys or gals roll in on especially a not-for-profit or what have you, or anybody, they're pretty scary, and they throw around a lot of verbiage like, you must give it to us now, you'll be in contempt, we can arrest you if you don't give us, that kind of craziness.
Well, and obviously the data, the online web-based system that we're doing, I mean, we were talking about the assessment itself, but the web-based data system is actually, it's HIPAA compliant. So there's already, there's good federal law in terms of what you can and actually cannot share and what you're not required to share based on personal information. So it's our understanding that the kind of information we'll be tracking in this online system is HIPAA protected information, and so we can refer to that. And I believe the Public Defender's Office will be making some reference to that as well.
Yeah, another thing as well, I know this might sound a little awkward, but I think if something like that were to happen, people get pretty scared, get pretty paranoid. I think it's going to go up the flagpole pretty quick, and you're going to find out, hey, X agency got a call this morning. We obviously went through our protocols. We let them know what their responsibility was, what their rights were, et cetera, especially to the client. Again, this might sound kind of awkward, but if something like that happens, I really need you to let me know.
Okay.
You can just call my office and let me know that there was, I wouldn't want to call it an incident, but there was an occurrence. I think it's going to be rare. But the reason why I want to know is because I think the more of us who are working on this on a global basis, our eyes and ears are on the ground. And then if we start hearing rumors out there, we got to let each other know.
Sure.
That the rumors are going around that, because you know how the rumors go. It's, oh, so-and-so gave out information. So-and-so got arrested because they gave out information. And it's not true, right? But that's how rumors spread. And they could really curtail the confidence that people have in the system that we're building here. So,
You bet.
like I said, when those guys roll in, they scare the mess out of organizations and individuals. So I'd appreciate it if hopefully you'll never get
That
that
would be
call and
great.
say, well, Councilman Cardenas said if something like this happened, he wanted to know. So hopefully you won't hear about it and I won't hear about it, which means it didn't happen. So when it comes to this confidentiality, is that something that you're continuing to develop, or do you think we got a handle on that so far?
I think we are attacking it both on the online web-based system that we're tracking. That's part of the reason we went with this provider, because they already, collect that kind of data and maintain it in terms of meeting all the HIPAA requirements. And then I think the public defender's assistance with the sort of protocol, if in case, in a rare case something like that happened, will help us with that, and that's underway. I think, we already have in place the system to disconnect a name from the assessment itself by a numbering system that never,
So that name
use
isn't
the
floating
agency.
all
There's
over
no name floating out
across
there. Yeah.
jurisdictions.
So I think we're addressing that. There was lots of folks that were concerned, actually, as you would imagine, at the agency level. So we got lots of good feedback in terms of from folks in the agencies themselves about some of their concerns about that and how we can address that. So we've been working on that pretty much.
So
from
when
the
it comes
beginning.
to the possibility of having a certificate of confidentiality, do you think that?
I feel pretty good about that. Yeah, I feel like we're going to be able to maintain confidentiality. I mean, obviously, nothing is probably foolproof, because somebody could decide to. There are some folks in an agency who could tie a name with a kid, and they could disclose information about that. But
Which would be total out of protocol.
exactly,
That would be
yeah.
an accident.
I don't think there's a. I can't imagine. Maybe someone will point out to me that maybe in our current, the system we're designing, that there's a loophole or there's a gap someplace, and if they do, we'll close it. But so far, I think when we've described the system that we're creating to folks, most people have said, "Well, it sounds like you've addressed those concerns adequately." So,
Okay. In your report, you mentioned 718 youth have passed the Youth Services Eligibility Tool.
you said 718.
718, right? And then, and you expect to be servicing 1,200 youth citywide?
Yeah, eventually, the system we're going to build will have a capacity to serve around 26 to 2,700 once we're fully up and funded. So this first quarter or the first year, we only, in terms of the funding amounts, we're basically allocating about $5,000 per client or eligible client. The system only had a capacity of somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,100 clients. So we're somewhere around 65 to 70% of that capacity right now. But then our plan is to actually up that capacity in the next, when we renew the contracts here. That's in process now. So eventually we would have the capacity to do, so like I said, somewhere in the neighborhood of 26 to 2,700. So I think with the screening, the screens are going better now. Obviously eligibility rates are up, which actually increases the number of clients. I think as long as we continue to screen the volume, we just, we have a consistent, on all the agencies' parts, continue to screen young people, identify and find those young people most at risk. I think we can, before the end of next year, we can hit that, have the capacity hit. And then it's, the idea of it is it's a, if you think of it, you have 2,700 in that range capacity at any one time to serve those kids. So obviously in a given year, you'll serve more young people than that, because you'll have kids that
few hundred will
drop out.
Already.
Some kids would have gone through some things like that. But at any one time, if you think of it as a number of slots that an agency could be maintaining and working with any number of youth at any given time, it's going to be in the 2,700 range that we have capacity to right now.
Now, what's the estimation in our city of the number of youth that we would like to get to if we had all the money in the world and once we had everything in place and all the agencies had the capacity? Are we talking in the tens of thousands of youth? Or are we talking closer to 5,000 to 10,000 youth?
Well, the research is pretty consistent that, the numbers of kids that are really at risk of joining a gang is somewhere in the range of about 15%. So 85% of the kids in the city will never join a gang, regardless of what the circumstances are out there. I don't know off the top of my head what the sort of general youth population is citywide. Whatever 15% of that would be, in a theory, that would be what you'd want to have a capacity to build a system that would have that much. Obviously, it's substantially more than 2,600. I'm confident of that.
But it's not 100,000 youth that really should get this level of service.
Probably not. Yeah, I mean, if you look at,
I'm estimating it's in the tens of thousands top.
Somebody did some numbers for us that we had somewhere in our grid zones of the 10 to 15, because you're really talking about a 10 to 15 year old.
Yeah, I'm talking
population.
about the 50% that you're talking about.
Yeah, and that's of the 10 to 15 year olds. So you really have to, narrow the youth population down to kids between the ages of 10 and 15, which is when kids really are making that decision. Largely, there's some kids on either side of that. And then you'd want to look at what is the general youth population between the ages of 10 and 15, and then it's 15% of that. So somebody did some numbers on some of our grid zones for me on that probably a year ago. It varied obviously in terms of the geography because of the density and the size of the grid zones. But it was anywhere from that age group was somewhere in the number of 3,000 to 6,500 youth that were in that age in these targeted areas. So if you figure 15% of that, if it was 3,000, you'd be saying you'd want to serve in the neighborhood of 450 young people. If it's 6,000, you're talking about in the neighborhood of probably 1,500, or not 1,500, probably about 900 kids. So if we have a capacity of about 200, in one area you might be at 50% of what you'd want, and in another area you might be at 20% of what you
And
want.
we're talking about an average investment of about 5,000 per youth.
That's the number we've used as a rough budgeting.
And
number.
when we don't do the right thing by providing these services at the street level in this fashion. We're talking about California, the real number is $252,000 to incarcerate a kid for 12 months.
That's the state.
Boy or girl, the state.
EJJ, yep.
Yeah, and then you're talking about as an adult, we're spending just shy of $50,000 for your average adult. That's not an adult that has medical problems or
Right.
any special issues. That's just to have them behind bars, given 3 squares a day, et cetera, no complications. It's about $50,000 per person. So, and the odd thing about all this is when you really get right down to it, it's the pot of dollars that we're using for this are coming from the same constituent, the same taxpayer.
Indeed, they are. And I think, if we, obviously, to invest in young people on the front end, and if we can demonstrate that we actually are getting results and reducing the rate of kids that are joining gangs, I think it would beg the question that then we might want to look at our priorities in terms of how we spend our resources and argue that we invest more of those up front because we get a better bang for our buck.
What happens to the kids who take the screening and they don't, for example, the ones that didn't make the 718 list? What are we providing for them? What are we referring them toward, et cetera?
Well, that's been one of the challenges. I would say some of the agencies, this isn't the only program they actually have, so some of them will involve them in another program. In some cases, they're being referred to beyond the bell programs and service providers that are doing after-school programs if they're not at risk of joining a gang or they don't have elevated risk factors. In some cases, you're screening kids and they're already saying they're gang members, and so we're trying to engage them then with some of our intervention agencies and making cross referrals there. Then the other thing we've already had a couple conversations with the community development department as CDD rebids their entire family, what they're now calling the family source system. That will be geographically focused. It doesn't exactly, it doesn't line up exactly with our grid zones, but a number of those, because those are based on using, community development block grant money, there are a lot of similarities in terms of poverty levels and stuff like that. Those programs are really focused on twofold: one, increasing family income and self-sufficiency, and secondarily to improve educational outcomes for young people. So we've been talking about how we can, the idea would be that a kid wouldn't, there'd be no sort of wrong entry point for a young person or a family. So there might be a young person that comes to one of the new family source or centers who really, after somebody works with them there, they realize this kid's got some issues related to gangs and gang violence. We should refer them to one of our grid agencies in terms of seeing if they qualify and get services there, and vice versa. If we've screened a kid that got sent to one of our gang prevention agencies, to then actually make the referral to one of the family source centers, say this kid doesn't have the elevated levels of risk factors related to gang joining, but he still has some particular needs related to school or social, aptitude and things like that. So we could make the cross referrals over there as well as a new additional.
Otherwise, 6 months
source.
later, then the kid will qualify.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's not the. If you could look at any neighborhood in our grid zone and you could say there's not the level of positive, just general positive youth development services, the abundance of those that's necessary to help that 85% that are not part of that 15%. And that's obviously another issue in terms of, we're talking about how do we increase the resources for this particular target population. But, if you think of just sort of general prevention as opposed to the more targeted prevention we're doing, there's not an abundance of those kinds of general youth development resources out there. And probably to have the capacity we need. I think for us as a city, that's one of the reasons we're focused on the parks. Now we're focusing on the summer positive youth development. Basically, that's what we're doing. The summer is positive youth development activities in the parks, but we're also looking at how can we, over the long term, I would like to see us create a vision where, Summer Night Lights is just sort of a, positive youth development on steroids in the summertime, but how do we then extrapolate that out over the course of the 9 months when we're not in the summertime, when kids are in school, but they still need things to do, positive youth development activities in the non-school and weekend hours to provide them those opportunities.
Whether we give a kid something to do, his or her energy level is still going to be the same.
Sure.
And they're going to expend that energy, unfortunately, sometimes on negative things. In previous conversations, you mentioned that that the Y set was developed and that they a testing had been done, or during the development they worked on a certain population or something like that. Can you remind us how they came about?
Yeah, we did
coming up
some,
with this?
first of all, it's based on, 20 plus years of the review of the literature, and a lot of the questions are actually been done in some of the national gang research that's been done. So there's some of those questions, and then the assessment tool was developed on that. And then we actually did some, multiple people looked at it, gave feedback, the questions were changed. Then we actually did it with some, did the assessment tool with some kids not in our grid zones, who were not in our programs, to assess them, to see how it worked with them instead of in the zones. And then obviously as we piloted it, particularly with the first 6 prevention providers that started late last fall, they gave us a lot of input because they were the first sort of guinea pig agencies, and they were using it. And there were things like they would be assessing a student and they'd ask them a question, and they would so you get a blank stare on a kid's face, and so they we changed some of the ways the questions were phrased to be able to actually help kids understand those better. So I would say we're probably on somewhere in version 20 in terms of that assessment tool being redone over time. And then now with the new computer audio aided system, that's going to also give us a means to work with that. And then actually USC was able to, we supported an application that they submitted to the National Institutes of Justice to get a 3-year grant to actually work on validating the assessment tool. So they're going to be getting a control group, probably through probation, that actually wouldn't have gone through any of our grid zones and the assessments to see if this actually is a good predictor, if it's able to predict kids who are actually likely to join a gang, and to see what kind of predictability quotient that it has. So we would hope in 3 years, the study, this assessment tool will have been studied and will make improvements over time.
Are we aware of any other similar tools that have been tested or tried out, like in Chicago or?
There's nothing else that's very specific to gang joining. There are delinquency assessment tools. Our probation department has, for young people who are already been adjudicated in our system, have something called the Los Angeles Risk. It's LARC. Help me, Michael. Los Angeles Risk and Resiliency. LAR. Yeah. So there are some things like that. There are some different assessment tools out there, but not anything that's very specific to gang joining. So this is, they say that this is.
Is there somebody that could sit down with me and walk me through the process and how they got to where they're at on this development?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, the folks at
Professor or
USC.
some-
Yeah, Professor Karen Hennigan is the person who's really been the driving force in terms of coordinating the other experts on this, and she could certainly, I'm sure we could make her available
Yeah, I'd
to have
love,
her do
I'd
that.
love to sit down with her, have her walk me through.
Yeah.
How they got to where they're at. There was a particular question that struck me, and I got to ask. What's the purpose of asking the kid where they were born?
I think I'd have to ask Karen that. I mean, I think it's just looking at to have an assessment of would a young person who might be an immigrant youth, might that have be a different presented them some specific challenges that they might not have as if they had not been an immigrant. So I think it was more related to that, not in terms of there's no effort to say, well, you don't get services if you don't happen to have been born in this country.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, I guess I'll ask her that question when she sits down with me. I figured it's just probably just a data factor.
Yeah.
Not so much a determinant of risk.
Yeah.
Directly. But obviously, for example, if you're an immigrant here in California, there was a political decision made by the voters saying, well, you don't do bilingual aid.
Right.
You don't. Whether it's right, wrong, good, bad, or otherwise, you're not going to get that service. So it's possible that quite a few of the immigrant kids are not getting the services in the schools, and therefore might contribute to some frustration of their lack of ability to keep up with their peers and things of that nature. Again, kids have a lot of energy, and when they're upset or bothered or feel like they're neglected, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I remember, I mean, this is both used as the attempt of this is to use this as a predictor for gang joining, but it's also to learn sort of the patterns. I mean, this is also the researchers have said, we will, once we continue to implement this over the next 3 or 4 years, we will likely have one of the largest data sets that they've ever had in the country in terms of this kind of information. So, if we had, for example, if you had a higher preponderance of young people who actually are immigrants for gang joining, I think we would want to know that. Or if it was less, if maybe the immigrant experience actually ends up being a contributing protective factor, that while in fact many young people who are immigrants, who weren't born here actually do join gangs, they join gangs at a lower rate than, say, kids who are 10 to 15. It would be something I think we would want to know. So I think, we're trying to do both a data-driven approach to client selection, as I said, to not, to make sure we get the right kids. But then we also want to learn from this experience so that we can try and increase our our predictability as to what are the kinds of kids that actually, obviously there's always going to be exceptions to the rule, but what are the patterns that are really evident in the life of a kid that for whatever reason seems to make them decide to make that decision to actually join a gang? Because if we know that, then we can figure out how we try and address that. We can target our efforts to say, well, if this is what really drives this process, then we got to address that particular issue so that we can stop that from happening.
Yeah, thank you. I agree definitely. The more information we have, and the better we get at this, the better we can help them. Also, I wanted to thank you for the work that you've been doing in developing the training curriculum. It's come a long way, a lot of discussions, a lot of input, and it's something that I think those of us who have been working on this realize how critical it is, especially when you see the precariousness of a new profession, especially in a profession where you have people who have a past, as you described it earlier, and for us to have a good curriculum and a developed one, and one that we're going to continue to improve on, and something that can be used and respected, not only used but respected as a model, it's important that we put it together carefully. And it looks like you have a pretty good synergy of the presenters and the organizations that are going to be part of that institute as well. So
I appreciate that. As you know, it's
and in another 30 days, you're going to be.
We're actually almost there. I mean, I actually had hoped to have it for here, but
give yourself a cushion. Fine with me. So I just look forward to sometime in the next 30 days you're going to let us know that.
We're going to actually do it as a transmittal because we'll actually have a plan for. We hope to actually, as part of that, be a recommendation for a contract to be let to actually have that actually be contracted out so we can do the work.
Good. All right. I was hoping to finish about 5 today. It's just after 5. We're not doing too bad. It's a very important and big report. So thank you very much.
You bet.
We're going to go to public comment now. We do have one public comment card. Shalon Joseph. Are you familiar with the way presentations are done to this committee on public comment?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Councilman.
Shalon, I think the first time Shalon spoke to this committee, she was pretty much directing her energy toward me because I made a comment about public defenders. But I appreciate the fact that she helped clarify something. I think she thought I was being a little derogatory, but actually I wasn't trying to be. But I do know more about what public defenders do today. Thank you, Shalon. Go ahead.
Councilman, I wanted to address 2 things that Mr. Carr said. The first actually is not not speaking to his point, but to Summer Nights Lights, I wanted to let the councilman know that our office is collaborating with the city for Summer Night Lights in the Humphrey Park site this summer. We actually are going to have attorneys volunteering to staff a booth for 3 days, July 22nd, August 13th, and September 3rd from 7 to 9 to talk about expungements. We have gotten Public Counsel and LA Guidance to donate some brochures on expungement, so we will have, we're hoping to have at least 3 lawyers and maybe a paralegal staff booths there at least for 3 evenings for the summer. We just got approval to do that. So I wanted to let the councilman and Mr. Carr know that we'll be there for that. I'll be there on the 22nd myself. And also, just to comment, our office, the Public Defender's Office, did meet with Mr. Carr. We actually met twice regarding the YSET. We had a number of concerns regarding the confidentiality of the YSET, also the consent form, and we in particular were also concerned with the immigration question. We did explain to Mr. Carr that one of the things that we're fearful of is that if this is a document that's filled out where there is any indication of illegal status, and that youth is then sent to the Division of Juvenile Justice, we were really concerned about this document getting into the hands of the state system, because ICE is immediately notified. Yes.
What?
ICE is immediately notified of any questionable immigration, and holds are placed on youth who are sent to that facility immediately. So we were very concerned.
Continue.
We were very concerned about that information for that reason. We were also concerned with questions in the YSET, actually the YSET 1, questions 54 to 70 about admitting gang membership, admitting any type of illegal behavior, because again, we were concerned about 186.22s being filed in the future, or the information of admitting gang membership on this form being a basis or a foundation to pursue gang allegations in the future.
Now, so that the people, we're speaking on the record here, so that people understand, if for some reason somebody is considered by law enforcement or by the judicial system as being a gang member, and they happen to go before a judge, let's say, there's sentencing ramifications for that individual if they get convicted of something, if they're on record as being a gang member or not, correct?
Correct.
And some of those enhancements can be pretty dramatic.
Correct.
For example, it's my understanding that if somebody is considered to be a gang member and the court recognizes them as being a gang member, someone could receive a sentence difference between, as a juvenile, they could actually be sentenced to life versus not?
There's 2 different things. If they're tried in adult court, they could technically get a sentence to life. However, if they go, let's say, to DJJ, they can only be held till 25.
Age 25.
Age 25. So, however, if they're tried as an adult, then yes, that's a possible life sentence.
Well, being a gang member, could that contribute to being identified as a gang member? Could that contribute to being tried as an adult?
Yes, if the crime is one that allows the youth to be prosecuted as adult, a gang enhancement definitely increases their chances of that happening.
And like you said, if they're tried in adult court based on a particular crime, the sentence could be life in prison without parole.
That's correct. So Mr. Carr did meet with us, and we did, as he stated, we did agree to work with him on a number of issues. And right now, we're actually working on it right now. We are reviewing the consent forms to see if there's any additional language that we feel should go in, and Mr. Carr was very open to working with us on that, on adding any language. And we are, in fact, I just wanted to verify what he was saying, is that we are working with him on trying to set up a training for all the service providers to deal with the issues that may arise out of the information in the form. And we also are coming up with an intake form that's designed especially for court-involved youth, because what we're hoping is that in some of our sites that feed into the grid zones like Sylmar, that we can actually start referring clients to the grid zone. And we want a form that's designed especially for kids who are involved in the court system to protect them from any of this information being used in their court case.
Wow.
And we're working with him to design a way. We also had discussions. There's 5 things I know that I'm supposed to be working on for him, but we also did talk about discussing with the service providers how to design progress reports for court-involved youth, so that only information that's pertinent to the activities that they're supposed to be doing for probation are placed in the reports, and that there's no additional information that goes in from these reports into the progress reports that are turned over to the court and the court file to protect the youth.
Well, thank you. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. Obviously, you're working with the mayor's office directly with Jeff Carr as well on these issues, but it just goes to show how much credit we should give ourselves as a city, because most jurisdictions, when you realize these complications or what have you, what most jurisdictions tend to do is they just say, forget it. It's not worth it. Let's just not even deal with it. Just leave it the way it is, instead of creating a system like we're creating now, looking at the intricacies of realizing that we're trying to help these youth at the same time. We don't want to accidentally or inadvertently hurt somebody or cause them harm and just say later on, oh gosh, tough. No, it's not tough. It's life for that person.
And I will say that
thank you for working on the details.
Mr. Carr and his office did, we're very open to meeting with us and has heard all of our concerns and is collaborating with us to try to address those concerns as far as our clients are concerned, the court-involved youth.
And they thank you for giving them more work?
Right. Actually, he gave us more work. He punted.
So it goes both ways?
Yeah.
So he returned the favor?
He's like, sure. Design all that and get back to me.
Good. Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you for, again, providing us those clarifications and also reminding us how complicated this work is. It's not that simple. It's really not that simple. The old systems we used to have were a lot simpler, and I don't think they were anywhere near as effective as we are today, and we will be tomorrow. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else here for public comment on item number 1? Okay, nobody else here for public comment on item number 1. We'll close public comment on item number 1. So with that, we'll go ahead and await the review of the CAO's office. Do we have an estimate from anybody as to when they're the budget process is over? I mean, everybody has more time?
No, sir.
Nobody knows. All right, well,
Planning on hold it?
what's that?
Are you going to hold it in committee?
Yeah, we'll hold it in committee. I'm expecting that we should hear back soon. So talk to Michael in my office and let him know when you think you'll have that back. Obviously, if there's a problem with the timing, then we'll go ahead and I'll make the determination to just release it and go to the floor of the council. So with that, that concludes the items on our agenda. Is anybody here for general public comment? General public comment? Anybody here for general public comment? Seeing and hearing none, general public comment is now closed. This committee is now adjourned. You did that without a glass of water? Pretty good.
Thank you. You did too, yeah.